talk was inspired by you, Yoke, last year when we were wondering together if there is a connection in between the physical heart and the possibility of accessing our inner self, our higher self. And we didn't know if the meditation on the heart actually helps or brings any benefit regarding this connection. So what are we going to try to do right now to unite three things in one? I would like you to center your attention in the middle of your chest, in the heart region, to try and breathe deeply through your heart, in and out, while you are expressing the intent of connecting with the divine within yourself. And do this through the presentation. So, centering, breathing through your heart, and uniting with all-encompassing self. If you, for some reason, snap out of it, please try to get back in. What I will going to read are a group of quotations that I found helpful in this journey of finding the connection in between the physical heart and something above the regular human consciousness. And I need help from the audience. I will read one paragraph at a time and have a little pause in between. The quotes are from the esoteric teachings, the inner group teachings, and collective writings. I couldn't have any original idea about them. I didn't interpret them. It's a research, and I want you to help me with any hint or inspiration that you have think that would help the whole audience understand more from these quotes. Okay, so did I explain? All right. So now don't forget to pulsate through the center of your chest, this intention of union. So the first slide. I kind of mixed things in this first slide to present that man has a sevenfold constitution, and I placed the seven interrelated constituents divided for this talk in an immortal part, the Higher Triad, and the lower quaternary that forms the mortal constituents. So, and why did I do that? Because I will speak a lot about the Buddhi manas and the Kama manas, so you can see what they're associated with. That this higher triad represents the individuality, the one with everything idea, and is related to the Akasha and the one life. So from here to here, so we are all one life represented by lots of functional forms that actually dissolve and reconnect themselves into the one life. do we have, is there any problem with this slide? Does anybody have a question about it? Or something is really out of whack with it?
Monica, I believe when it says on the concept of will force, on kama manas, being in the lower self, I think generally speaking, that would be more of a want force than a will force. I think the will is most likely connected with Atman, the creative, the one life creative force. So you have to understand that the will force is really our lower self, which is more appropriately want, because it's the lower self. But that's all I have to comment on there, is it's really not spiritual will.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, so I was looking for the two sources or two differences in memory in the following two principles, the buddhimanas and the kamamanas. The buddhimanas is the all-conscious self that incarnates periodically, which is always the same. The kamamanas is changing with every new incarnation and personality, and is conscious but for a life period. This lower self, which is manifesting through our organic system, acting on this plane of illusion, imagines itself as the ego sum and falls into what Buddhist philosophy brands as the heresy of separateness. This terrestrial wisdom, at best, is influenced by all the chaotic stimuli of the human, or rather animal passions of the living body. The higher ego cannot act directly on the body. The kama manas does, and its action and behavior depend on its own free want and choice as to whether it will gravitate more towards its parent, the Father in heaven, or the animal, which it embodies, the man of flesh. The higher ego is the vehicle of all the knowledge of the past, present, and future. And although it is from this fountainhead that its double, the lower mind, catches occasional glimpses of that which is beyond the senses of man and transmits them to certain brain cells, the memory of the earthly events has its seat in the personal ego alone. No memory of a purely daily function, of a physical, egotistical, or of a lower mental nature, such as eating and drinking, enjoying personal sensual pleasures, transacting business to the detriment of one's neighbor, has to do with the higher mind, HPB says in Collective Writings. None of this memory of daily functions has a direct dealing on the physical plane with either our brain or our heart, for these two are the organs of a power higher than the personality. These memories have to do only with our passional organs, such as liver, spleen, the stomach, and so on. And now we have this. Okay. Now, any questions?
You obtained this information from where?
This information is from Inner Group Teachings, page 24.
Thank you.
Oh, it says there.
Did the intergroup teaching say that the pineal gland corresponds with divine thought?
Yes.
Because usually Blavatsky used divine thought for Adi Buddhi, which is in Pralaya, and divine mind would be divine, Adi Buddha would be divine mind in the manifested realm. So that's an interesting inconsistency in Blavatsky's wording.
All right. So you say that it should have been Adi Buddhi.
I think, well, or divine mind.
Okay.
Which is already manifested. Obviously, the pineal gland can't have connection with that which isn't manifested. So, if we're a purist, that should be divine mind.
Yeah. The liver and the spleen cells are the most subservient to the action of our personal mind, the heart being the organ par excellence through which the higher ego acts through the lower self. The memories of physical and personal deeds, mental experiences of a terrestrial nature, and of earthly biological functions can, of necessity, only be correlated with the molecular constitution of various kamic organs and the dynamical association of the elements of the nervous system in each particular organ. Well, this got me, because it looks like every organ has its own nervous system. And our brain or heart don't really interfere in the process of us feeling the sensation or taking an action when we eat and drink, or so we're working not from the brain or from the heart, we're working from the other organs. Is this what you understood, guys? From the quotes that I read so far? It looks like we are functioning from a brain that serves individual organs, is not the brain in the head that actually perceives and sends messages for actions in eating and drinking, actions that we are doing every day. Kind of.
So you're saying that the brain. I'm not sure, but the brain is integral with the organs. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that the organs kind of function without the brain from the head. They have a nervous.
The organs. Well, for example, in
the kamic
in
one.
Chinese medicine, for example, I'm using this as an example for maybe what you're saying. I don't know. The liver has many functions physiologically, but in Chinese medicine, the liver would be, for example, the seat of our ability to organize. Would hold the negative emotion of anger. Independent of the brain.
This is, yeah, exactly, that's what I meant.
In Oriental medicine, or the spleen would be the earth element.
It looks like the kamic organs have a brain of themselves.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know. Richard?
From
Well, perhaps consciousness would be a better word than brain. It's
Sure.
a different type
Yes.
of consciousness?
Physiologically, it is now known that the heart does have a neural plexus, which is very much like a brain for the heart. So I don't think it's just pure consciousness. There seems to be a neurological correlation you can call it sort of like the solar plexus is a brain of sorts to handle all kinds of things that never gets to our physical brain at all, our instinctive reactions and things. And memory is definitely in every life atom. So definitely there's consciousness in every organ, and it does act very much as if there is a brain. We know it's in the heart, and physiology hasn't discovered it yet in the other organs, but like Ken says, it's definitely there, and they do have different functions, so it's not just consciousness, I believe.
Yoga.
Monica, perhaps you can repeat what you said earlier, but I understood, and perhaps I didn't understood it well, that you talked about the functioning of the organs of a lower level when we, for instance, eat and drink. But what I tried to say in my lecture was that the lower functioning, like eating and drinking, we have to be very responsible and using our higher thinking possibilities. When we do that and when we choose that, we have to start being conscious of what we are doing in our higher mind, even the things belonging to our lower daily self. Yes, so
Yes.
we can eat and drink like an animal, and I think then you are right. But when we, as theosophists, conscious of the suffering of others, eat and drink, we do it in another way. Yes, and I didn't understand quite well what you wanted to say, but can you explain more?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I am, I was, I think I was aware, I am aware that there are at least seven planes in eating also, so you can have a Buddhic way of eating, and I thank you for bringing that in. When we are working from our animal side, from our lower side, there is a nervous structure around the kamic organs that takes care of our actions without involving the brain from the head. That's what I was trying to find out from the audience, if they got that from the quote. Okay?
So I understand you well, that when we eat and drink conscious, knowing what we're doing on an ethical way, then it's certainly not my liver who is organizing that.
From Monica Maghiar's point of view, yes, but I didn't find a quote yet. Yeah. The memories of physical and personal deeds, mental experiences of a terrestrial nature, and of earthly biological functions can, of necessity, only be correlated with the molecular constitution of various kamic organs and the dynamical association of the elements of the nervous system in each particular organ.
So I think the point that she's trying to make is the memory of those are not going to go into the akasha, they're going to go into the astral plane. Now certainly you can control your behavior from your higher nature, but that is not the type of thing that's going to get recorded into the akashic record properly used. It's going to go into the astral light because it's a lower body function and has nothing to do with the higher consciousness. Now your conscience use of those functions will definitely be recorded akashically and not astral light, but the very functional parts will be in the memory, as she said, the memory of those things will be astral light memory.
Yeah, but exactly. It says that nothing of this goes in the akasha.
Yes.
But I agree with Yoka, just because I think we'll find something in the quotes, is that the information from the lower organs will go in the astral light, but if you do it conscious, it will gonna go not in the very low level of the astral light.
Yeah.
It will gonna go somewhere where it will show that you made an effort, where it will gonna be less noise. Because this is the trick, how through your actions not to provoke more noise in your mind, so you have less work to do when you are trying to bring silence, when you're trying to do the paramitas. So we're trying to eliminate the noise in the brain. So whatever lower self-action you need to do your best and another 100% at it, because it matters. It reduces the noise in the astral light.
If I understand correctly, Monica, if the heart is really at a very high level, and prana can work as a vital force on many levels, almost up to the point of the jiva, the individuality. Prana is not confined to just the lower quaternary. And we think of what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, the qualities act in the qualities. So what then will restrained effect? But I created this universe with a portion of myself and yet remain separate. Well, that individuality is more like the jiva within, but the prana, I believe, if I understand it, can work at many levels. It's not just the lower level.
You're right on. Actually, this is one of the next quotes when they show how the prana, auric envelope, and jiva, and the universal deity are actually kind of the same thing, and how you can aim high through the heart to jiva level. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. The body, so desecrated by materialists and man himself, is the temple of the Holy Grail, the entry room of the mysteries of nature in our solar universe. The body is an Aeolian harp, corded with two sets of strings, one made of pure silver, the other of catgut. When the breath from the divine fiat brushes softly over the former, man becomes like unto his God, but the other set feels it not. It needs the breeze of a strong terrestrial wind, impregnated with animal effluvia, to set its animal chords vibrating. It is the function of the physical, lower mind to act upon the physical organs and the function of the physical and their cells, but it is the higher mind alone which can influence the atoms interacting in those cells, which interaction is alone capable of exciting the brain via the spinal center cord, Shushumna, to a mental representation of spiritual ideas far beyond any objects on this material plane. The cerebral physiological process only condition them or give them a final form for purposes of concrete manifestation. Should I? All right. The consciousness, which is merely the animal consciousness, is made up of the consciousness of all cells in the body, except those of the heart. For the heart is the organ of the spiritual consciousness, and it corresponds indeed to prana, but only because prana and the auric envelope are essentially the same, and because again, as jiva, it is in the same, as jiva, it is the same with the universal deity. The heart represents the higher triad, while the liver and the spleen represent the quaternary, taken as a whole. The heart is the abode of spiritual men, whereas the psycho-intellectual man dwells in the head with its 7 gateways. The heart is the king of the body, its most important organ. Go? What does it mean, huh? Thank you. That's big. Okay. I need to breathe, huh?
No, can you read that part over again?
Sure.
The part talking about
The heart is the...
liver and the heart and the brain.
Okay. And with the prana too? Repeat the prana stuff too? Or just the... Okay. The heart represents the higher triad, while the liver and the spleen represent the quaternary, taken as a whole. The heart is the abode of the spiritual man, whereas the psycho-intellectual man dwells in the head with its 7 gateways. The heart is the king of the body, its most important organ.
Where is that from?
Collective Writings 12, 600, page 694. Collective Writings. Oh, okay. This is a big, there's a page paragraph, a page from there. You want me to read it all? Do you guys have any questions? Or any participation whatsoever? Go for it. Yeah, no, I mean, does it make sense? Okay. The heart is the center of the spiritual consciousness, as the brain is the center of the intellectual consciousness. But this spiritual consciousness cannot be guided by a person, nor can its energy be directed by him, until he is completely united with Buddhi Manas. Until then, it guides him, if it can. That is, makes efforts to reach him, to impress the lower consciousness, and those efforts are helped by his growth in purity. Hence the pangs of remorse for wrong done, the prickings of conscience, reproaching for evil, inciting to good. These come from the heart, not from the head. In the heart is the only manifested God. The other two are invisible, and it is this manifested God that represents the triad, Atma, Buddhi, Manas. Anyone who can reach up to and so receive at will the promptings of the spiritual consciousness must be at one with Buddhi Manas, that is, must have attained adeptship. But the higher Manas cannot directly guide the ordinary man. It must act through the lower Manas and thus reach the lower consciousness. The effort, however, should be continually made to center the consciousness in the heart and to listen to the promptings of the spiritual consciousness. For though success be far off, a beginning must be made and the path opened up. There are three principal centers in the body of man: the heart, the center of spiritual consciousness; the head, the center of psychic consciousness; the navel, the center of kamic consciousness. Any two of these may be positive and negative to each other according to the relative predominance of the principles, and therefore of their organ for manifestation on this plane. The impression is made by the positive on the negative. For instance, the aura of the pineal gland vibrates during the activity of the consciousness in the brain and shows the play of the 7 colors. This septenary disturbance and play of light around the pineal gland are reflected in the heart, or rather in the aura of the heart, which is negative to the brain in the ordinary man. This aura then vibrates and illumines the 7 brains of the heart, as that of the pineal gland illumines the 7 centers in the brain. If the heart could in its turn become positive and impress the brain, the spiritual consciousness would reach the lower consciousness. The spiritual consciousness is active during deep sleep, and if the dream that occur in so-called dreamless sleep could be impressed by the heart on the brain, your consciousness would no longer be restricted within the bounds of your personal life. If you could remember your dreams in deep sleep, you would be able to remember all your past incarnations. This is the memory of the heart, and the capacity to impress it on the brain so it becomes part of its consciousness is the opening of the third eye. In deep sleep, the third eye opens, but it doesn't remain open. Still, some impressions from the spiritual consciousness do reach the brain more or less, thus making the lower ego responsible. The Eastern Secret School knows each minute portion of the heart and has a name for each portion. It calls them by the names of the gods, as Brahma's hall, Vishnu's hall, and so on. Each of these corresponds with a part of the brain. The student will now begin to understand why so much stress is laid on the heart in connection with meditation, and why so many allusions are made in old Hindu literature to the Purusha of the heart. And so, with the regards to concentration, the blessed master Kutumi writes, "Your best method is to concentrate on the master as a living man within you. Make his image within your heart and a focus of concentration so as to lose all sense of bodily existence in one thought." So again he says, the greatest difficulty to be overcome is the registration of the knowledge of the higher self on the physical plane. To accomplish this, the physical brain must be made an entire blank to all but the higher consciousness. When the brain is thus rendered a blank, an impression from the heart may reach it and be retained. In acquiring the power of concentration, the first step is one of blankness, then follows by degrees consciousness, and finally the passage between the two states becomes as rapid and easy as to be almost unnoticed. He who can do this at will has become an adept and can store the knowledge he thus gains in his physical memory. Such is the kingly function of the heart in the human body and its relation to the brain, which, as a whole, is the vehicle of the lower manas enthroned in Kamarupa. Now, Blavatsky is saying, how can you have pure noetic memories versus terrestrial psychic visions? You can have them on the condition of paralyzing at will the memory and the instinctual, independent action of all the material organs and even cells in the body of flesh, an act which, once that the light of the higher ego has consumed and subjected forever the passional nature of the personal lower ego, is easy, but it requires an adept. The second way is of being the reincarnation of one who in a previous birth had attained through extreme purity of life and efforts in the right direction almost a yogi state of holiness and saintship. And 3, occasional, and it doesn't depend of the will of the seer, through extreme weakness and exhaustion of the material body, through illness and suffering. We're good so far? Now, the similar interpretation by GDP. The heart, the physical organ, not the symbol, is the organ of the spiritual man in the physical body, by means of a ray from the spiritual monad in the human physical vehicle. Therefore, it can be called several things: the organ of the reincarnating ego, the organ of the personal man. Again, it can be called the organ of life, for it is the center of life of the physical body. It is from the heart that stream upward into the brain the rays illumining the mind, touching the pineal gland, setting it into rapid psychic vibration, and thus casting instantly over the akasha inside the skull a brilliant glory, so that to the eye of the Shiva, when the heart illuminates the brain through the pineal gland, the entire contents of the skull are glowing, radiating with light, so much so that in cases of ecstasy, as the Christians say, the light streams out, forming a nimbus around the head and shoulders. Now, why is the heart the physical organ of the personal man, as well as of the spiritual or individual man? Because it is the organ of the human monad. Similarly, the liver and spleen are the organs of the astral vital or human animal monad, a child of globe D. I will add, however, that every important organ in the human body is the representative in that body and functioning for it of one of the monads in the composite human constitution. You will remember how many hundreds of times you have heard me repeat, man is a composite entity formed of different monads collaborating in the complete septenary entity to give him his septenary constitution. Man is a little world drawing all he is from the greater world in which he lives and moves and has his being. Next in the future, far, far beyond the end of the 7th round of the present chain, Manvantara, far, far into the future, the form in which what is now the human being will embody itself will be a globular or circular form. Call it a globe of glory, a globe of fluid, liquid light. The center or focus of this living globe will conjoin into one what now are 2 organs, to wit, heart and brain. At a still later date, when our destiny shall have been reached, when we become sun entities in the deeps of space, we shall then be as Father-Son now is. The heart of Father-Son, using the word heart in the sense of the focal life intelligence center, is at once heart and brain. In other words, spiritually and intellection or intellect. The two have conjoined, more accurately, have reunited into one. And this will be not because what are now our present physical brain and heart shall move together and coalesce, but because of the fact of the heart's being septenary itself as the organ on this plane of the human monad, all the septenary parts of that monad will then be expressing themselves as a septenary entity. That thought is something I have often tried to explain, not so much the particular fact of heart and brain becoming one, but the fact that there are different monads in the human constitution collaborating to make the human constitution. But that particular monad, which is the most important to us as human individuals, is the monad we have agreed to call the human. It itself is septenary. It itself has its inner God and all the other attributes of the other septenary qualities, powers, and functions. Man willfully enshrouds himself in the veils of the lower selfhood, which are wholly of his own making, so that he almost lost the dimmest consciousness of the divine flame burning in his outmost essence. Yet this world of shadows and deceits, it is part of our own homeland, because it is part of the universe in the very heart of which we live, and towards the divine heart of which we shall one day return on the wings of the experiences that we have been through. The inmost of us is like the inmost of the universe, because we are inseparable parts of the Great Mother from which we all spring and in which we all live. Men, know thyself means going inwards in thought and feeling, thus ever in greater measure aligning ourselves self-consciously with the divinity at the core of the heart of each one of us. The divinity is also the very heart of the universe, having no specific location, because it is everywhere. It must never be forgotten that the lower manas is the same in its essence as the higher, and it may become one with it by rejecting kamic impulses. In this fourth round, we can be fully human only by effort and aspiration. We have the possibility to live in buddhi manas, but we prefer kama manas. Our animal side includes a sense of grasping, acquisition, selfishness, is indulgent, appetitive, running after this, running after that, without stability of character. This is how people living in their bodies, their astral and their physical and their psychical beings are but dead spiritually. Any man or woman who lacks sympathy for others, lacks an understanding heart, who lacks intellectual penetration for the great problems of the universe, is relatively soulless on this plane. His or her higher nature is not functioning. And GDP gives some alternative behavior to living in the lower quaternary.
Source, please, this page.
In a group teaching, 77, the last quote.
I thought GDP was...
No, I will start with some quotes from GDP right now. But this was from inner group teachings. In this fourth round, we can fully be human only by effort and aspiration. That's, yes, in a group teaching. Ah, yes, the composite nature was the GDP. Volume 12, page 3. 1 second. And now suggestions on how to reach our higher self, or the best in us in our condition. Do not seek to be good. Seek to be impersonal, and you will be good automatically. But he whose vision is clear, whose heart is at peace, whose mind is tranquil, seeks neither for good or for evil, for his whole heart is set on the supernal light within the supreme spiritual guide. As long as you have a good man in the world, you will have evil men, and vice versa. The salvation of the human race is coming about not by a craving for good and to be good, but by a yearning which passeth all ordinary understanding, to be impersonal, self-forgetful, so that almighty love and pity, which hold the universe in their keeping, can stream through the human heart without any barrier of the lower selfhood whatsoever. Follow the pathway upon which you have entered. Follow it faithfully, despite the mistakes that you may make and the stumbling blocks that you may have to pass over. Follow that pathway leading ever more inwards to the God within you, and I promise that you will, in due course of time, enter upon the most marvelous adventure that a human being can undertake. You will be able to pass the portals of the sun, ascend into its very heart, and return from this mystical adventure shining with a solar splendor. I still have two quotes. Therefore, no matter in what station of life a man may be born, no matter to what ray he may belong, this does not place him. What places him is where his consciousness is focused. If it is focused upward, rising into the Atman, then he contains divinity. This is one way of becoming even more at one with your inner God. Your inner God is the core of you. All the rest of you, in a greater or less length of time, will dissolve. But there is a center within you, your inner God, of which the heart is the heart of the universe. That heart that is everywhere, because nowhere in particular. And this heart is deathless. It is omniscient. It is ubiquitous. It is you considered as a spiritual monad. And then Blavatsky, the path is one for all. The ways that lead thereto must vary with the pilgrim. All right. I barely read it. Any questions or insights? I will play you some music. I will introduce Ryan. No. Any questions? Good? Okay. Now I just have 2 seconds of something. I forgot to do this. You want Oh, this is, actually, you know what? I didn't talk about this. This is Blavatsky, and this is really cool. Please, if you have a second to read it. Good. It's her style. Okay. This is what I wanted to do. Let's see if I can do this.
Monica, thank you very much.